In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera pulled a corroded lump of bronze from a Roman-era shipwreck. It sat in the Athens National Archaeological Museum for 50 years before anyone looked at it carefully. When they did, they found something inside that should not exist. 30 interlocking bronze gears, the surviving third of a machine that once held more. Teeth cut to tolerances a 19th century clockmaker would respect, arranged in a gear train so mathematically sophisticated that when a team at University College London set out in 2021 to reconstruct the complete device using X-ray tomography, surface imaging, every analytical tool modern science owns, the researchers described what the ancient builder had achieved in language you do not normally find in an engineering paper as something bordering on genius. Here is what the surviving gears actually do. They model the motion of the moon, including the part that should have been impossible. The moon does not move across the sky at a constant speed. It accelerates when closer to Earth, slows when farther. The mechanism reproduces this with a device called a pin and slot, one gear driving another through a pin riding in a slot set off center, so the output speeds up and slows down in a precise rhythm. That trick, mechanically modeling variable celestial speed, does not appear again in the historical record for well over 1,000 years, deep into the age of European clockmaking. They predict eclipses. A spiral dial on the back tracks the 223-month Saros cycle, the rhythm by which eclipses repeat, and tells you the month, the character, even the expected time. A second dial corrects the timing across a 54-year supercycle. Solar and lunar eclipses predicted by hand-cranked bronze centuries in advance, and a front display that, if the 2021 reconstruction is right, showed the sun, the moon, and all 5 visible planets moving through the zodiac simultaneously, a portable cosmos. A team of engineers fed the complete published analysis of the mechanism into Grok AI and asked 2 questions. What knowledge did the builder have to possess, and who in the ancient world could have possessed all of it at once? What came back restructured the question entirely. Here is what Grok identified when it mapped the knowledge prerequisites for building the Antikythera mechanism. 3 separate knowledge streams had to be present at once in one workshop. First, Babylonian astronomy, the Saros eclipse cycle, and the precise parameters of lunar motion accumulated over centuries of systematic record-keeping in Mesopotamia and imported into the Greek world in the generations before the mechanism was built. Second, Greek geometry, the epicyclic theory of celestial motion, the mathematics of Apollonius and Hipparchus, which turns observed irregularity into systems of circles that gears can imitate. Third, a precision bronze-working capability that appears in no other surviving artifact of the ancient world, hundreds of hand-cut teeth meshing reliably in a case the size of a shoebox. No single stream is anomalous. The Babylonians had the records. The Greeks had the mathematics. The Mediterranean had bronze workers. What is anomalous is the integration, all 3 mastered simultaneously in one object. And on the question of where, the mechanism itself contains a clue that took a century to notice. In 2008, researchers deciphered the month names inscribed on the mechanism's calendar ring. They are not generic Greek months. They belong to the calendar family of Corinth and its colonies, and the greatest Corinthian colony in the ancient world was Syracuse, the city of Archimedes. Hold that thought, because a Roman lawyer is about to make it worse. I'm Dr. James Mercer. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What I'm about to walk you through has been sitting in an Athens museum for 120 years, and we are still not done reading it. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand what Grok found, you need to understand what the Antikythera mechanism is and how long it took the modern world to accept what it was looking at. The shipwreck dates to roughly 70 to 60 BC. The mechanism itself was likely built between 150 and 100 BC. Some researchers argue earlier still, based on the astronomical parameters frozen into its gearing, parameters that match the lunar theory of Hipparchus, the greatest observational astronomer of the Greek world. The ship was heading west toward Rome, loaded with bronze and marble sculpture. the cargo of a civilization being bought wholesale by its conqueror. The mechanism came up as an unrecognizable encrusted mass. In 1902, the archaeologist Valerios Stais noticed what looked like a gear wheel embedded in it and suggested the lump was some kind of astronomical device. He was politely ignored. The consensus of his era was simple. The ancient Greeks did not build precision machines, therefore this was not a precision machine. 50 years passed. In the 1950s, a historian of science named Derek de Solla Price began studying the fragments, and in 1974 published the work that forced the question open, Gears from the Greeks. Price established that the object was a genuine ancient calculating machine, a hand-powered analog computer for astronomical prediction. Working without modern imaging, he also got important details wrong. His proposed gear layout included arrangements that later analysis would overturn, but the core claim stood, and it was already unbearable enough for the field. Someone in the 2nd century BC had built a computer. Then came 2006. An international team led by Tony Freeth put the fragments through X-ray microfocus tomography, seeing through 2,000 years of corrosion, tooth by tooth, inscription by inscription. The 2006 Nature paper redrew the mechanism from the inside. The eclipse prediction dials on the back were mapped, hidden inscriptions were read for the first time, and the lunar pin and slot device was identified. The piece of genius Price never had the technology to see. And in 2021, Freeth's team at UCL published a proposed reconstruction of the missing front panel, a nested epicyclic display of the whole visible cosmos, sun, moon, 5 planets, driven by one-hand crank. That reconstruction is contested among specialists, and I will treat it as what it is, the best current proposal, not a settled fact. But even the uncontested parts, the parts physically present in the surviving bronze, make this the most complex mechanical object of the entire ancient world, by a margin so large it has no context. Nothing comes close, not in the same century, not in the same millennium. The scholarly response to the mechanism has evolved from dismissal through acceptance to a subtler position, containment. Acknowledge the device, but treat it as a one-off, a freak achievement by one genius workshop, implying nothing broader about ancient capability, a lightning strike, not a tradition. That containment has one large problem, and his name is Cicero. In his dialogue De Republica, written around 50 BC, within a decade of the shipwreck, Cicero describes a device that Roman audiences of his day apparently accepted as real history, a sphere built by Archimedes that showed the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets moving just as they move in the sky, driven by a single mechanism. When the Roman general Marcellus took Syracuse in 212 BC, the sack in which Archimedes was killed, Cicero says the general took that sphere home as his single chosen prize, and that it was still being shown in Rome generations later. Elsewhere, Cicero mentions a second such device, made in his own lifetime by his teacher, Posidonius of Rhodes. Put the pieces in a row. Cicero says planetary machines existed, names their makers, and traces one to Syracuse in 212 BC. The mechanism's own calendar ring speaks the month names of the Corinthian family, the calendar of Syracuse's mother city and its colonies. And the wreck lies on the sea road that hauled Greek treasure west to Rome. For over a century, the literary evidence and the physical evidence sat in different academic departments. Classics on one shelf, engineering on another. The scholars of each rarely audit the other's primary sources. Grok has no shelves. Asked to cross-reference Cicero's description against the mechanism's actual capabilities, it returned the obvious conclusion nobody had standing to publish. The description and the device match, not poetically, functionally, which reframes everything. The Antikythera mechanism may not be a lightning strike. It may be a production model, one unit from a tradition of planetary machines that was already at least a century old when this one went into the water. Archimedes did not necessarily build this device, but the device belongs to the lineage, Cicero says, Archimedes founded. The most complex object of antiquity might be ordinary for its makers. The team's instruction to Grok, take the published record, the 2006 tomography, the 2021 reconstruction, the inscription studies, the ancient texts, and identify what the gears mathematically require their designer to have known, not what historians attribute to Greek science, what the bronze itself demands. The finding came back in 3 parts. The moon. The pin and slot device does not just make the moon speed up and slow down. The 2 gears that drive it are mounted on axes deliberately offset by a precise amount, and the whole assembly rides on a larger wheel that rotates with the moon's 9-year cycle of orbital precession. So the speeding and slowing itself slowly shifts around the sky, exactly as the real moon's does. Whoever designed this did not just know that the moon is irregular, they knew the structure of the irregularity, its size, its period, its slow drift, and they compressed all of it into 4 gears and a pin. Engineers who model this today call it what it is, a mechanical implementation of Hipparchan lunar theory in a shoebox, the gear arithmetic. To make bronze imitate the sky, the builder had to approximate astronomical ratios, and which are messy, with ratios of whole numbers of gear teeth, which are not, finding tooth counts like 127, 53, 223, prime numbers that lock long astronomical cycles into small metal wheels is a problem in number theory. The technique for solving it appears in no surviving Greek mathematical text. Either it was lost, or it was never written down, or the surviving record of Greek mathematics is thinner than the history books assume. The gears are, in a real sense, the only page of that textbook we have, the planets. The 2021 reconstruction rests partly on numbers inscribed on the mechanism's front cover, including a 462-year cycle for Venus and a 442-year cycle for Saturn. Those cycles are not in any surviving Babylonian or Greek astronomical text. They are more precise than the standard period relations the Babylonians used. Someone derived better planetary constants than the ones history says were available, and the only place those constants survive is engraved on this machine. If the reconstruction holds, the mechanism is not just an artifact of ancient engineering, it is a primary source for lost ancient astronomy, data that exists nowhere else on Earth. As the team continued pulling the thread, 3 more findings emerged. The first revelation: the technology gap runs forward, not backward. The mechanism's tricks, epicyclic gearing, the pin and slot variable drive, long-period dials on spiral tracks, do not appear again in the surviving record until the astronomical clocks of the medieval and Renaissance world more than 1,000 years later. And when they do reappear, they reappear step by step, painfully, as if being invented for the first time. Nothing inherits from Antikythera. No lineage, no apprentices, no descendants. A technology this mature does not appear from nothing. Price himself made the point. This device is not a first attempt. It is polished, compact, confident. It implies generations of predecessors, none of which have ever been found. The second revelation: we are reading 1/3 of a book. The surviving fragments preserve roughly 1/3 of the original device. The back dials well, the front barely. What the missing 2/3 did is educated reconstruction. The 2006 imaging showed how much can hide inside corrosion. An entire second back dial function, the 54-year exoligmos correction, was found that way, invisible for a century inside a lump. What functions rode in the parts that dissolved on the seafloor is simply unknown. The mechanism we argue about is the surviving corner of the mechanism there was. The third revelation: it was cargo. The ship was a freighter loaded with sculpture and luxury goods. goods sailing the standard treasure route west. The mechanism was aboard as a possession or a purchase, packed, crated, in transit to a customer. Sit with what that implies. Somebody ordered a portable Cosmos. Somebody built it somewhere in a workshop with tools and teachers and spare parts. Somebody was expecting delivery. A market existed, and a market means this was not the only one. It is simply the only one whose ship we happened to find, because a storm put it on the seabed, and a sponge diver happened to swim over it 2,000 years later. The sea road between Greece and Italy carried that civilization's output for centuries. It has never been systematically searched. The mechanism does not stand entirely alone. It stands at the extreme end of a tradition the record keeps hinting at. Hero of Alexandria, 1st century A.D., describes machines we can verify because he wrote down how to build them, and modern engineers who have built them found the designs work. A theater of mechanical figures running a programmed sequence from a falling weight drive, a wind-powered organ, and a cart that could be programmed with pegs and string wound on a drum to drive a path and stop on its marks, a cam-programmed automaton described as a working teaching device. Philon of Byzantium centuries earlier describes a washstand that dispensed a measured portion of water and pumice through an escapement-like mechanism, the same class of trick that would later regulate clocks. The surgical instruments recovered from Roman sites show bronze working of surgical precision as a living trade, so the capability existed in scattered documented pieces. What Antikythera shows is those pieces integrated at the highest level, and then the integration vanishing. The device's tradition dies somewhere in late antiquity, along with the institutional world that funded it, the courts and libraries and patronage networks that could support a workshop building planetary machines for wealthy clients. Knowledge that lives in institutions dies with institutions. The Library of Alexandria declined over centuries. The Greek scientific court culture dissolved into the Roman world. And somewhere in that long dimming, the last man who knew how to cut a 223-tooth eclipse gear died without a student. Cicero's line about the Archimedes sphere has one more detail worth hearing. He says Marcellus, who could have taken anything from the richest Greek city in the West, took nothing for himself from the sack of Syracuse except the sphere. The conqueror of the city judged one machine to be worth more than everything else in it. Rome kept the trophy. Nobody kept the workshop. Here is what 120 years of study has still not done. There has never been a systematic archaeological survey of the ancient shipping lanes between Greece and Italy. The routes are not a mystery. They are documented in ancient sources, confirmed by known wrecks, dictated by winds and currents that have not changed. The depths are within reach of remotely operated vehicles that have existed for decades. The Antikythera wreck itself, the richest ancient wreck ever found, was located by accident, by sponge divers blown off course in a storm. Maritime archaeology runs on a fraction of the funding of land archaeology, wreck by wreck, permit by permit, in waters tangled in jurisdiction. The result, the seabed along the treasure road of the ancient world's most mechanically capable civilization is, for practical purposes, unread. The probability that the one accidental find was also the only planetary machine ever shipped west is a number nobody has been willing to write down, because writing it down makes the case for the survey nobody wants to fund. And the one wreck we do know is not finished talking. Divers returned to the Antikythera site in 2012, and the excavations have continued season after season since. Bronze sculpture fragments, luxury glassware, pieces of the ship itself. The lump that changed history came out of the first, crudest salvage in 1901. Men in copper helmets dying of the bends. What the site still holds below the layers they could not reach is an open question being answered a few weeks of diving at a time. This artifact's whole history is the same lesson on repeat. It waits. It waited 50 years to be recognized, a century to be imaged, and it is waiting still in the museum and on the seafloor. So here is where this lands. A hand-cranked bronze computer built around 100 BC that models the moon's irregular motion with a mechanism clockmakers would not rediscover for over 1,000 years. Eclipse prediction centuries deep on spiral dials. Planetary constants engraved on its cover that survive in no text on Earth. A calendar ring speaking the months of Syracuse's calendar family, the city of Archimedes, and a Roman witness insisting a decade after the wreck that machines of exactly this kind existed and that the first ones came from Archimedes' hands. A device so mature it implies generations of predecessors. And a supply chain, a workshop never found, a customer never named, a cargo route never searched. We have been treating the mechanism as the story. It is not. It is one delivery that failed. And here is the part that keeps me up at night. In 2016, the excavators at the Antikythera wreck site found something no one expected after 21 centuries under the sea: a human skeleton. A young man buried in the sediment, preserved well enough that scientists recovered bones dense enough to attempt DNA analysis. The team nicknamed him Pamphilos. He was aboard when the ship went down. Crew or passenger, guard or merchant, nobody knows. He went into the water with the cargo, with the mechanism. The wreck did not just carry the most sophisticated machine of the ancient world. It carried people who knew what it was, where it was made, and who was waiting for it. And one of them is still there. What else has come up from that seabed? The statues, the glass, the second debris field a few hundred meters away that some researchers believe may be a second ship. That is the next video. When it goes up, you will want to have seen this one first. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The shipwreck episode is already in production. And in the comments, one question, which is harder for you to believe, that human beings built this machine 21 centuries ago, or that we managed to lose everything they knew, because one of those two facts has to be true. And after 120 years, the museum case in Athens still refuses to say which. I'm Dr. James Mercer. The moment I have more, you'll be the first to know.